let's use our new tools to see how we would analyze government policies on consumer welfare. We're going to look at two specific kinds of policies for this purpose. The first one is a quota. So a quota is a limit on the amount of a good a person can buy. And the second one is going to be a subsidy. So this is going to be a reduction in the price of a good up to some amount. So let's start with the quota. So let's suppose both goods had a price of 1, then the budget line would just be L1. Now let's suppose the government imposes a quota of Q bar. So you can't buy more than Q bar units of this good, of good 1. So though your budget line is this, remember the notion of a budget line is that you can buy anything on this line or anything below this line. So anything in this triangle is actually something you would buy. And because you have preferences that say more is better, you're going to buy something on the line. But if you have this quota, you can't buy stuff that has more than Q bar units of the good, of good 1. So you can't buy any of this stuff here. So if you buy something, it has to be here. It has to be in this area. In particular, because of more is better, you're going to buy something up here. So instead of a budget line, the boundary of your budget set is going to be this. So you're going to pick your favorite bundle. Perhaps you're going to pick this bundle A. Well, if you pick this bundle A, then your ideal bundle, if there were no quota, remember your budget line was going to look like this, right? It was going to be this L1 on the previous slides. From that bundle, you would have been able to pick this bundle B, which is better off, which you would be better off with than bundle A. So if your preferences look like this, then you're worse off with the quota than without. So just like with a price change, we can ask, what is the equivalent variation of imposing this quota? So how much money would the consumer be willing to pay to avoid the quota? So we could, if we want to find the equivalent variation, remember what we're going to do is we're going to take away EV dollars. Remember that we fixed the price of good 2 to be 1, and the price of good 1 is also 1. So this vertical distance between the budget line, so the slope of the budget is not going to change, and the vertical distance is going to be EV. So let's suppose we took away EV dollars and said, now there's no quota. Then you could buy anything on this budget line. And let's suppose we picked EV just so that when you pick the optimal bundle for you on this new budget line, where we've taken away EV dollars, you pick C, which is on the same indifference curve as A. Then your utility, with me taking away EV dollars from you, is equal to your utility from me imposing the quota on you. Right? You pick C if I take away EV dollars, and if I impose the quota, you take A, and your utility from C and A are equal. So this illustrates for you how you could use the concept of equivalent variation to analyze the effects of something other than a price change. For example, a quota. Notice that a quota doesn't necessarily make every consumer worse off. So in what kind of circumstance might somebody not be worse off? Well, if you would have consumed less than the quota in the first place, so when you picked your optimal bundle and you picked it at A, and A was a bundle that has less than Q bar units of good 1, well, that quota doesn't really affect you. So whether there is or isn't a quota, this consumer is not going to be any worse off. So in the pictures that I drew earlier, we were specifically looking at consumers who are worse off when the quota is imposed. It could very well be that the consumers aren't worse off. In this particular case, the quota isn't really affecting the behavior of that consumer. And the only consumers who would be worse off from the quota would be those consumers for whom the quota is actually lower than the amount of the good that they were actually consuming before. Let's turn to subsidies. There's lots of subsidies around. There's lots of examples of these things. And a lot of them are such that the consumer gets a certain amount of the good at no charge. And then the consumer pays for any amount of the good they buy beyond that initial amount. And so daycare is subsidized in many parts of Canada. Food stamps in the United States are a good example of subsidies, where you get the first $100 or so, or some fixed amount of your food is covered if you receive food stamps, and beyond that, if you want more food, then you have to pay for it. So let's suppose Q1, good one, is food. This is everything else. So this is the money you spend on food, and this is the money you spend on everything else. So the price of both goods is just 1. So if your income is Y dollars, you spend all your money on everything else, you get this bundle. If you spend all your money on food, you get this bundle. So without any subsidy, this is what your budget line looks like. Now let's suppose there's a subsidy of 100. So there's the first 100 units of good one are free. So you get the first $100 of food for free. So you get Q bar equals 100. So what you pick from now is actually this set. Why is that? It's because if you don't spend any of your money on food, then you still get the 100 units of food for free, and then you get all of your income Y to spend on other things. So if you spend none of your own money on food, you get the bundle Y dollars, which you started with, on everything else, and the $100 free for food. Or you could start to spend the $100 plus some of your own money on food, and then you have to spend less on other stuff. Here, you get to spend all of your money plus the $100 on food. Now, perhaps you pick this bundle A when you're asked to pick your optimal bundle. Well, if your budget line was this budget line here, when without the subsidy, you would be picking the bundle B, and clearly you're better off to receive the subsidy and get bundle A than to get bundle B. Now, a question we might ask is, well, are we better off giving you food stamps and $100 of food stamps, or should you have just received $100 in cash? Which one are you better off with? Obviously, you would take the cash if these were your preferences. Why? Because if I give you cash of $100, your budget line would not be this one. So Y 100, Y plus 100. That was your, originally, when you had the $100 of subsidy, your budget line looked like this. But if I give you $100 in cash, those $100 you can spend on other stuff too. So your budget line looks like this. It's just, if you spend all your money on other stuff, you get to spend Y plus 100 on other stuff. If you spend all your money on food, you get Y plus 100 on food. You get this whole line. So whereas you were picking this bundle A, when I said, listen, this $100 I give you, you can spend it only on food. When I don't restrict you to spend it on food, you pick the bundle C. and C is better than A. Since you're better off receiving $100 in cash than $100 in food stamps, we might wonder what the equivalent variation is for the $100 in food stamps. So we could give you, what is the equivalent if we gave you EV dollars, instead of giving you $100 in cash, we give you EV dollars in cash, your budget line would be this one. And so what is the amount we would need to give you to bring you to the same indifference curve, I1, that A is on, so that you pick the bundle D? We could calculate that number, and we would see that that EV is less than $100. So we see here that if the goal is to bring you to the indifference curve I1, so to bring your utility level up to the utility level that you get from A, then the cheaper way to do that is to just give you EV dollars in cash than to give you $100 in food stamps. Now it's important to keep in mind a few things here. So I was careful to say that if the goal is to get you to that utility level. Now, the exercises we've undertaken here was to study the welfare losses from various policies or the welfare gains and quantify them. But there's some things that we've ignored here. So I said that if the goal were to get you to that utility level, or to get you to that indifference curve I1, then the cheaper way to do it would be to give you EV dollars rather than give you $100 in food stamps. But perhaps that's not the goal. What this does, it allows us to quantify the cost of a policy. So if we have a policy that is to give people food stamps, this gives us a way of measuring some of the costs that policy has. But we have to keep in mind, if you're making a decision as to what the policy should be or whether that's a good policy, we have to also take into account the benefits that accrue from that policy. So perhaps there are benefits from people having proper nutrition, and that isn't to society overall, and that isn't accounted for in this calculation. So this framework gives us a rigorous way to calculate the costs that are borne by the policymaker in allocating these resources, but you have to take a bigger picture to really make those decisions and say, okay, well, what are the benefits? Is the model really accounting for all the benefits? It's not just, so the goal isn't just to get the consumer to utility level or indifference curve I1, but rather it's to increase the utility level of the consumer, but also there's a public health component to this, and we would need to then quantify that as well, and then balance it against the cost, which is, well, we could have just given them $100 and we're giving them EV, so 100 minus EV would be some sort of a loss of value, and so we would have to take that into account as well. And that's what this is getting at. So a word of caution is that we should keep in mind that the policies have benefits and costs that accrue outside of what's being modeled here, and that needs to be considered in making a final decision.